All I want to do. And with the Rocky Robinson intro, welcome to the game. I'm Mark Simon.
I'm Bob Marks.
And here we are. We're just going to wrap up March by Bob and I just talking about a few things that have been on our minds throughout the month. We've had some good interviews, Kevin Mullen, Julie Lind, Roseanne Faust. So it's been a good month for us in terms of interviews, but we've covered a wide spectrum of things, and we're going to dig into a few of them a little more in depth. Of course, none of those I guess Kevin's interview, Kevin Mullen, talked about the war in Iran and what it's done to gas prices. A friend of mine said the other day, who is not a big fan of the president, that he hopes gas goes up to $10 a gallon. And it certainly is, Bob, it certainly is Trump policies coming home to roost. I mean, a month ago, he was doing the State of the Union address and boasting about how low gas prices were. There are two indicators, it seems to me, that he follows more closely than anything else: gas prices and the stock market. So with that as a prelude, what's your take on all this, the war and the effect it's having domestically?
Well, when it comes to the war, I stand back and look at the last 7 presidents who've looked in the camera and basically said Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. President Biden famously looked in the camera, and when asked the question, he said, "Don't." Vice President Harris, during the campaign against Trump, looked in the camera and said, "Don't." It reminds me of when our cat wanted to jump on the dining room table. I look at it and sternly say, "Don't." The cat would put its head down, back up a little bit. 1 minute later, I look and he's up on the dining room table. So, it's been a cornerstone of our policy not to allow this to happen. I saw a survey this past week. 36% of Americans say it doesn't matter if Iran has a nuclear weapon. And so, that's where we are at this point.
Well, the challenge is, Trump looks more like a cat on a hut tin roof than a cat on a table. The challenge is this the way to stop them? And it certainly keeps them busy so they can't develop a nuclear weapon when we're bombing the crap out of them. But The fact is, when all is said and done, I don't know if we've made the kind of impact we want to. And you read about it. I'm no expert, neither are you. You read what experts say, and to actually eliminate their nuclear weapon capacity would require a commitment of ground troops far in excess of what we're willing to do, and probably to a level of casualties that most people would find unacceptable. So that's the challenge of all this, is that when all is said and done, have we made any progress in terms of where we need to be? Trump's approach seems to have been to decapitate the leadership of Iran, but that doesn't seem to have any. That doesn't seem to be the mission we're accomplishing, whatever that might be. And one of the challenges is that we don't really know what our mission is because it keeps changing rhetorically. I thought the most telling point that Congressman Kevin Mullen made on our show last week was he reviewed what every president has done before committing this sort of level of military, and they've laid groundwork for public opinion. The result being that when they first go in, which is a natural instinct of Americans, I think, that we support the effort, partly because we want to support the troops that are engaged in this. He hasn't done that. He still hasn't laid out a clear policy direction for what this is about. And that's the challenge. I guess it makes it easier for him to say, we've won and leave. But at the end of the day, to your point, have we stopped Iran from making a nuclear weapon?
Well, and I think it's beyond nuclear weapons now. as we've seen, Iran has claimed that they don't have long-range ballistic missiles, yet they fired a missile that went 2,500 miles. They now have the ability to hit London and Europe. So, I don't know the answer to this.
Well, the good news is I didn't expect you to know the answer, Bob.
That's here's the thing. We are at a point, which we've been at throughout our history now, where in the next 2 to 4 weeks, we're going to see decisions made that are going to have incredible impact on the future. And, we'll have to see who are we negotiating with? I think it's clear right now that Khamenei's son is more like a Weekend at Bernie's kind of situation, and that the military is clearly in control. But the military doesn't speak just with one voice. The choice now is, and it's the classic seduction of the Middle East. Do we put some troops in there, small number, special forces, whatever you want to call them, and try to seize these islands to open the Straits of Hormuz? The difficulty is, in order, we could do that, and I'm sure we can be successful, but we are going to have casualties.
Well, and the question is,
we also need to figure out how to keep the straits open beyond that. So, I think that that decision's going to be made. Whether we like it or not, it's going to be made by the president. I think he has somewhere between 2 to 4 weeks to resolve this in one way or another. And if not, the politics of it are going to completely overwhelm him. The American people, when it comes to boots on the ground, that seems to be where we draw the line these days. But we're in for this. Congress can jump up and down and hold their breath and all of that, like they have some better solution to this. But we need to open the Straits of Hormuz. The world economy is at stake. And the irony is, even if we say it's open, the tankers, the captains are going to look at each other and say, who's going first?
Yeah.
Beyond that, one last thing, and that is that, in a sense, it comes down to insurance companies. We can say it's open, but those tankers are not going to go unless they have insurance. That's kind of an irony as to where we are in the world.
I think the point maybe that underscores what you're saying is we don't really know what success is.
Right.
What does that look like? Reopening the Strait of Hormuz? Well, yeah, but it was open before, so it's a problem we created,
right? And
there's no clear solution. Even taking over that island, whose name I can never pronounce properly, doesn't seem to really be an answer anyway. Plus, it's within the ballistic missile range of the Iranians. So the problem is, what does success look like? And the best case scenario is that he gets out, but we really haven't demonstrably changed the circumstances and demeanor of the Iranians in terms of their desire to have a nuclear weapon or to replace them. Nobody wants regime change. That was one of the things that Trump was adamantly opposed to when he was a candidate. And in fact, he was highly critical of anybody who engaged in anything that remotely smacked to that. And now that may be the only real answer. And even then, you're inviting a guerrilla level war that could last for another set of decades. We saw that in Afghanistan, that there's no way to really change the dynamic. And the fear is, for every bomb we drop, we radicalize another 100 people in the country against us. So they have no reason to stop, and we haven't really given them a reason. And so their strategy clearly is, how long can the American people withstand whatever pain is being inflicted on us? And that leads us to gas prices. You say 2 to 4 weeks. I've heard people say the Republicans will finally begin objecting to what Trump's doing once the filing deadline passes and they see who they have running against them in primaries. Although it's a small sample, It's not necessarily a federal level sample, but there's clearly indications that Trump's influence on voters has greatly diminished based on the last couple of elections. Gas prices are a killer. They just destroy political careers all the time. And the longer they stay up, their strategy now is to say that, suffering through high gas prices is a form of patriotism. Well, that's not going to fly from Republicans any more than it would have flown from Democrats.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I agree with you. And I think there are two end games here. And one is that he finds a way to negotiate himself out of this situation. And excuse me.
I know you get all choked about this stuff, Bob. Yes.
He finds a way to negotiate himself out of it, or we force the straits to be opened. That's where we are. I'm not, I don't disagree with what you're saying. I do think that we've done a lot more damage than you're talking about.
Well, I'm
extraordinary damage to that country.
I'm not disputing that. I really am not. The question is, again, so what? I mean, not to be cavalier about it, but yeah, we can destroy their army and their navy and whatever else you want to call it, and they're still launching missiles. So what have we destroyed really? But more importantly, how do we stop them from starting over again and saying, we still have this nuclear materials. We're going to use them any way we want. There's an authoritarian religious government running that country. There's no indication that's going to change. And so, when the dust settles and we have pillaged and ravaged the country, what's left is still a people in place who are in control of the government and who have no interest in working with us, and whose main interest, as they have demonstrated for decades now, is to be the leading exporter of terrorism all over the world. And the great fear of this nuclear stuff is not a bomb, but somebody drops a vial in the middle of Penn Station in New York City with nuclear material in it. The next thing you know, everybody's sick, or even worse, smallpox or something like that. So the question is, what have we really done? What have we really accomplished? And I guess more importantly, from a political perspective, what is the mission?
I think after some double talk at the beginning, the mission, at least in the president's mind, has been clear. But my question to you is, let's go back to prior to this war starting. What was the answer to dealing with Iran? It sounds to me like the Democrats' answer is basically to accept the fact that a growing number of Americans don't care if they have a nuclear weapon. And so we do nothing.
Well, except that we didn't do nothing. We had a treaty that seemed to be working, that certainly was better than what we had done, and Trump avoided it immediately.
I think we can argue about whether that was a good treaty.
Well, at least it was something. It was better than nothing.
Yeah, but who can trust Iran? They've lied for 50 years.
And to quote your favorite president, trust but verify.
Yeah,
the fact
he's
is,
not my favorite president.
But it was certainly a working solution that has a more clear-cut strategy and vision than we have now.
I don't think, when you start out by sending billions and billions of dollars in cash to a regime, even John Kerry at the time said likely some of that money is going to be used for terrorism. So,
Okay, it's great to say, what did the Democrats do? But they're not in charge now. The Republicans are, and this is their war. This is the mess they've created. And okay, fine. If you want to say the Democrats didn't make it any better, fine. But the question is, are we making it any better now? Because it's a different president whose main campaign message was, those guys are screwing up, I'm going to make it better. Yeah, and the fact is,
I agree with that. Politically, he's on the edge here. And, in the next 2 to 4 weeks, we could see a dramatic shift in, voters' minds that'll be hard to reverse that. we're talking about the House, we're talking about the Senate. And I know Democrats say, well, yippee, that's great. But we end up back where we have been all along.
What we'll see, I think, in the next 2 to 4 weeks, if gas prices stay up and the market continues to go down, President Trump will change something somehow to try and make it look as though this is all going to turn out. And that includes, he's got to, from a political perspective, he's got to do something to bring down the price of gas. And the only way to do that is to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. You make a great point about everybody's going to be, well, after you go ahead, let me know how that works out. But the fact remains, even though you could argue that the oil that's being bottled up in the Strait is not coming to our country, which makes you wonder why the prices have skyrocketed the way they have, since it doesn't really seem to affect our supply. But the bottom line is, gas is through the roof, and it's going to stay that way as long as this conflict keeps the Strait of Hormuz impassable. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the midterms. This Saturday, just tomorrow, is another round of No Kings rallies, which look like they're going to take place all over the country. There are reports by the organizers there'll be 3,000 different rallies around the country. Last time they did this, there were literally millions of people who participated. I think they're expecting there to be more. There's some magic number. There's like, if 3.5% of the population is in the streets protesting something, it usually manifests itself in a dramatic political shift. So they're clearly shooting for that number. I don't know, what if it's 3.4? What if it's 3.6? I mean, I don't know if you can put that kind of exact detail on it. But the question is there growing dissatisfaction? I think the answer to that is yes. Is there growing undermining of the coalition that Trump put together to take control of both houses of Congress? It certainly looks like that's the case, that he is losing ground rapidly. Or steadily is probably a better word.
He is. And you can see it with independent voters. Democrats have always been against it. The people who are out there marching are people that have always been against him. And that's fine. But the reality is his popularity has dropped significantly. It's because he's lost independents, younger voters, and that was the coalition that got him elected. So the march is fine. I don't think it ultimately has an impact on the election that's going to occur here in November. I think some of these larger issues are going to be more important in terms of how that comes out. So,
well, the question, I guess, is whether it's a catalyst that mobilizes some activists. It's not regular folks who tend to show up at these marches, which is not to diminish who they are or what they're doing or why they're doing it. Right. But those tend to be the people who man phone banks, who go door to door, who participate in the process and get the rest of us showing up at the ballot. And so it's useful, I suppose, in the sense that it energizes the opposition to him. It does make me think, if I were Hakeem Jeffries and I were in charge of the Democratic caucus, I'd be telling my members, don't do anything, let him do our work for us. Because every day he does something, every day he does something just plain weird. He rambles on about things. He does not look healthy. He looks unhealthy, in fact. So I think there's a lot of reasons why he's undermining his own level of support in this upcoming election.
He's Trump. He's been, all those things that you're saying he's been doing for the last decade. And up until now, to a great success in terms of politically. I agree with you. In a normal circumstance, the Democrats are going to win the House. It's just the way historically things have gone. Losing the Senate, which I think is a real possibility, is a bigger issue. And then, Trump's still going to be president. Democrats may try to impeach him. I expect that they will. I don't think it'll have any more success than they've had the last few times that they've tried to do it. I guess what worries me, and this is where I've always had a problem with Trump, is he's an incredibly flawed individual. And, put him into a corner, a real corner, like he may be here in the next few weeks. He's still the president, and who knows what's going to happen.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
reminds me of one of my favorite Peanuts cartoons, where Lucy Van Pelt is at the blackboard in her classroom writing, "I will not talk in class. I will not talk in class," for 3 screens. And on the 4th screen, she wrote, "On the other hand, who knows what I'll do?"
Exactly.
And there's your geezer reference for the day. The interesting thing is that there's a lot of worry about what's going to happen. Trump is making a lot of noise about how he wants to control the election, how he wants to eliminate a bunch of things. And I know we want to talk about vote by mail, but the trouble they've got is that it looks like it's too broad. I mean, it's one thing in a close election to say, okay, we're not going to let them vote the way they want to in Milwaukee or in Arizona or wherever they've been seizing ballots or calling into question ballots. My sense of it, and it's just that, is that this is much more broadly based than that, and that disputing over one precinct or one county somewhere in the country is not going to really demonstrably change the outlook. There was a poll I quoted in my column in the Daily Journal this week. There's something like only 23% of Americans have confidence that the election will be held in an above board and unrigged way. Now, apparently that cuts across all lines.
Yeah.
That for whatever, they think the Republicans are going to screw it up, the Democrats are going to screw it up. But it speaks to the level of distrust in this country that really is one of Trump's legacies, I think.
Well, yeah, it's his legacy, but look where we were before he was president. That distrust has been growing for a long time. The fact is, neither party trusts the other party and is not going to give an inch. The SAVE Act has become ridiculous because they've added so many other things on their Christmas tree effect to try to force the Democrats to vote on transgender issues and things like that. The real issue, I think, when it comes down to it, I have no problem with voting by mail. From the beginning, I've thought that it made a lot of sense. But we saw in the Supreme Court this week that it's likely that the Supreme Court they're not going to outlaw voting by mail, but they're going to try to draw a line as to what point you can accept ballots. And whether that means that you set like a 5-day limit before the election for ballots to be postmarked, or how you do that. You and I, we've been involved in this forever. We've watched elections here, San Mateo County and throughout California. I'm very comfortable with the election process. And while there's always been fraud, it's anecdotal. You can point to this situation here or that situation there. But I do think that this is a big part of Trump's legacy, is he has really undermined trust in elections and done it kind of effectively. And the numbers that you quoted show what it is. I'm not sure how we get back from there. You can't put the genie back in the bottle.
And the challenge to that is that if one person says it, and it's the president, who obviously remains a persuasive figure in a lot of corners, his ability to sow distrust may be his greatest talent. To sow doubt. In fact, he emerged on the national scene because he raised doubts about Barack Obama's legitimacy as an American citizen. But the counterbalance to that is for responsible leaders to say, I'm okay with how this turned out. I'm okay that the system is safe. And the trouble is we don't see that happening on the Republican side at all. They just won't say, I mean, you see federal hearing after congressional hearing after congressional hearing where people are asked directly by Democrats, did Joe Biden win the election in 2020? And they won't say yes. They avoid the question. It's astonishing to me. That being said, you're absolutely right. Our own experience, San Mateo County was one of the leading counties in the country at going to vote by mail. And there's been no hint of any, they're more likely to be incompetence in the vote count than there is fraud. And so I guess there's a level at which I can understand if they don't show up by election day. I mean, to me, that parallels voting in person. You can't vote the day after election day. Right. So I don't think it's that big a burden to say to people, you have to have it in by this date. It has to arrive in the county elections office by election day. I also can't imagine. See this. I can't imagine it's going to have the huge impact on turnout that I think the Republicans would like it to.
Yeah.
The more onerous part of this is the ID part, which is really anti-democratic with a small d, I think.
Yeah. Well,
let's talk a little bit about the governor's race, which has still remained a muddy affair.
Yeah.
When we were on with Congressman Mullen last week, I said I thought that the race would crystallize at some point. It's clearly late, although I would argue it's early in the race because the candidates. I mean, I just saw my first ad. I was watching the NCAA tournament and saw an ad for Swalwell, his first ad. So I think they're beginning to show up now in ways they haven't. Maybe they needed to wait and save their money. Maybe they needed to wait because in terms of really going full barrels with ads, you know better than I, having been a consultant, it actually is kind of early to go into a major ad blitz.
It is.
And the proof of that is Tom Steyer, whatever bump he was going to get from his ads has come and gone. And he really hasn't moved the needle all that much beyond getting from 1% to 10%.
The way I look at it, and it's a little different than what I've said before, we really do have two separate primaries going on. The Republicans are going to get 35, maybe 40% of the vote. And then the Democrats have their primary. Where the Democrats have a problem is they're going to be attacking each other. Even in Swalwell's ad that I saw down here, there are undertones of attacking Mahan, who's got a very large independent expenditure that's waiting out there to weigh into this. I saw an ad by Becerra down here in the Inland Empire. And, it was kind of the classic ad. So they're going to be out there, but as it gets closer, they're going to be attacking each other. And when you start attacking each other, go back to the last really competitive race in California outside of the recall, and that was 1998. And it was between Al Cecchi, rich guy, Jane Harmon, Congresswoman, and Gray Davis. Gray Davis was mired in third place, wasn't even a factor. But Cecchi and Harmon spent all their money attacking each other, and Davis won the primary. By the way, this week he urged all the candidates to stay in the race, using his situation as an example. Not that anybody should listen to what Gray Davis has to say. I just think when they start attacking each other, it brings all of those candidates to a certain level. We saw in the latest poll, 16 for Hilton, 14 for Blanco, and 10% for the three leading Democrats. So while I still think that somehow it's going to be a Democrat and a Republican in the end, I think, anything can happen at this point.
Well, the other question is, at what point do the Republicans start ripping into each other and one of them emerges? See, I think part of your calculation there, if I can project what you're saying, is that one of those two is going to fall by the wayside. They're not both going to stay at 20%.
Yeah, that probably is the case, but it's an interesting situation there. Hilton has a lot of money. He has more money than Swalwell, at least the last reporting period, or anybody but Steyer and Mahan. Blanco, and being a former consultant, what did he do this week? He seized the ballots from last year, the Prop 50 ballots here in Riverside County. A judge here gave him permission to do that. Appellate court backed up, Bontas, the attorney general, sued and backed up Blanco. The appellate court backed him up. Why is he doing that? He's doing that because he wants to get attention. He doesn't have the money, and so he wants to fight with somebody. And Trump is not going to endorse Blanco. He's not going to endorse either of them, I don't think, at this stage. But you're right. They're going to have their battle, and the Democrats are going to have their battle. And we'll see. We'll see what happens.
I by the way, I want to put in a plug for those who've decided to stay in the race, because I think I understand why. It makes me think of Shirley Chisholm. When she ran, nobody thought she was going to win the Democratic nomination for president, but she thought it was important to make a statement on behalf of the community that she came from. And I understand completely why Becerra would stay in for that reason. Betty Yee would stay in for that reason, if for no other reason than to change the dynamic the next time. I don't think they expect to win. I don't think that they should necessarily expect to win. But there's an important statement from their perspective, I think, to make about being in the race, being seen as part of the group of people who are being taken seriously as running for governor. And frankly, I mean, we've done this ourselves when we've had candidates on our show who are in competitive races, and we've opted to have like the top two candidates. And we made a decision not to include the third party candidates and everybody else, along the same lines that USC made it initially about why they wouldn't include everybody. But I don't have any problem with all 9 of them debating, because it's another good way to discern between them. And I'm disappointed that they didn't go ahead and have the debate and just include everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. Plus, if you're at 4%, 3%, 5%, and the leading Democrat is at 10%, why would you drop out of the race?
It reminds me of one of my favorite quotes was a pitcher for the St. Louis Cardinals named Joaquin Andújar. And after a game, he said, well, I only have one word to say. You never know.
Yeah.
And I always like to think about printing it as one word. So the race is going to remain a mess for a while. They'll spend their money. They'll do what they do. And I think, it's understandable that people aren't focused on it. The race the candidates have not done anything other than Steyer's incredible ad barrage to make us think, I need to pay attention now. And people have other things to do. There's no reason for them to feel like they have to pay attention now. I would dispute the polls that show the undecided is like at 15, 16%. I'm sure it's much higher than that. But the way they ask a question in a poll is, well, if you had to decide today, and I think some people answer that question knowing that they're not really deciding today. So I think that will muddle along and it'll be interesting, but I think it'll get closer, especially as we start seeing ballots show up in the mail, assuming we still get to vote that way. Let's talk a little bit about some local stuff. We have, oddly enough, the most hotly contested race is for assessor, clerk, recorder, which is one of the few remaining offices where you run countywide now. We have Supervisor David Canepa running, and the assistant assessor, clerk, recorder, Jim Irizarry running. Clearly what Canepa wants to do is to make the conduct of the office up to now the main issue. There have, over the number of years now, been highly critical reports produced that suggest that the offices, all 3 of those, are not well managed, that there's been a lot of turnover. People are not at an employment level happy to be working for the current assessor, clerk, recorder, Mark Church, and his handpicked assistant, Jim Irizarry. There's some question about whether or not the assessments are lagging in a dramatic and in unfortunate way. There are a lag, I was just told by some internal sources at the assessor's office, There's a lag in the assessed valuations that are levied against nonprofits. They get an exemption, and those exemptions, the granting of those exemptions, is lagging behind, and it's going to be a terrible shock to some of these organizations to discover a tax burden that's much greater than they think it's going to be. So that being said, it's an odd race because it's not a political position. I would imagine it's hard to raise money for it because there's nothing you can do in that office that benefits people unless you decide you're going to give out contracts illegally.
Yeah. And, as we've talked about before, it really to me is a battle versus name ID and the candidate that has money versus the guy who has the ballot designation. In those lower tier races on the ballot, doesn't mean they're not important. People do look for who's the most qualified. And so that's what Irizarry has going for him. Otherwise, Canepa seems to have everything else going for him. So we'll see. We'll see how that plays out.
Irizarry's ballot designation is assisting, and then it's the job title. So that's got to be a significant plus in a race where people are probably not paying much attention. The rumors are that Irizarry is able to self-fund his campaign so that he would be competitive with David Canepa, who, when he ran for Congress against Kevin Mullen 4 years ago, demonstrated he had his own fundraising base. And he is quite literally everywhere. I mean, every time you turn around, if you're at some public event, there he is. So it'll be interesting to see how that manifests itself.
Right. Have you seen any evidence of Irizarry having money to spend or doing anything campaign-wise?
No. In fact, I joked about it in my column. He now has a website, but if you go on it, it says private page.
Yes, I actually, after that, went on it, and you are right.
Yeah, well, good. I was accurate.
Yes.
So it's. I talked to him just last week, and at a charity event, and he seems very comfortable, very much at ease. So maybe there's more there, and he's just waiting to reveal it, as it were. Again, it is early enough that you don't necessarily have to do everything right now, assuming that the title he can list on the ballot designation is a huge leg up. But it is. We're sort of closing in on when it's time to get going.
Right.
Ballots drop, I think, May 6th is something like that. So pretty soon, people will start voting, and you have to have something to tell people about why they should be for you. The other local issues are interesting, and they're interesting for this reason. We'll have almost every city council in the county having elections in November. So it's quite early there. Filing has not even come close to closing. But there are two big issues in San Mateo. One is the plans by the Bohannon Company to completely redesign and redevelop the Hillsdale Shopping Mall into a massive residential center with a commercial component to it. It's very similar to what's called the North area now, which has got an Apple store and a bowling alley and a movie theater, and is very much sort of a gathering place above and beyond some retail. The proposal calls for 8 to 10-story residential buildings on the El Camino side of it, 2-story on the residential side, and the battle lines are clearly being drawn. There's a person running in that district against an incumbent who clearly wants to make that issue, opposition to that proposal a central issue. And then there's a proposal to put a detox center in a residential neighborhood. And what strikes me about the merits of each aside is that we see the kind of hardening of lines on opposition and support that we see mirroring what happens at the national level. That it isn't just, I don't think this is a good idea. This is a bad idea, and the other side is evil. And it's unsettling There was a public event last week or this week where the way the opposition behaved was embarrassing. It was way out of control. And so what we see is what's going on at the national level, the kind of divisions and the hard line divisions are being mirrored here at the local level.
Yeah, and a lot of it has to do with neighborhoods around there. And that's been the case in San Mateo forever. I grew up there and lived there most of my life. Still have a place there. But I've seen over the years where there have been these intense battles that take place that are really driven by neighborhood associations. And, you know, so I think that's part of it. I think you're right. I think that where things used to be a little bit less vitriol, today the politics at the national level is now also down here at the local level.
Yeah.
And people, I think a lot of it has to do with social media. I think that's really changed local races dramatically. So it's
yeah, that's a good point, because it's called keyboard courage, right?
Right.
People are willing to say things. You know, because I'm in the public eye writing a weekly column, I get a fair amount of that, and I'll reach out to people when they, you know, they'll write to me in surprisingly hostile ways. You write back and they go, "Oh, geez, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to get that angry." Sometimes they don't say that, but
they double down.
I still remember when I was writing for Climate Magazine before it went under. Somebody posted on one of the social media sites, "Well, we all know Mark Simon is a tool of developers," and I, which would come as a surprise to developers, I suspect. But I wrote to the guy and said, "Have we met?" And he said, "No." I said, "Well, would you like to meet for a cup of coffee?" "No, I feel no reason to talk to you." And I said, "Well, that makes it easier for me. Thank you. But geez, to change subjects, because it's March 27th, it is opening day at Oracle Park and the San Francisco Giants. Never mind that opening night thing, which I thought was, never mind the game. I thought the broadcast was disastrously poorly run. They really weren't watching the game very much. They were so busy being thrilled that they were the ones launching baseball. But I am, as always, optimistic about the Giants this year. I think that if everything goes the way it should, they could be a pretty good team. And that's, the big caveat, if everything goes the way it should.
Yeah. Speaking of the game the other night, a lot of it is just promoting Netflix programming.
It was
the same with Amazon and basketball and the football games that have been on there. So that's a different subject. On opening day, you're going to have each team's two best pitchers going. And so that's baseball. It was not a good night for the Giants. I agree with you. I think their lineup, even if you look at last year's numbers, there's a tremendous amount of potential there. And so I think they're going to score more runs than they have in the recent past. A lot of it comes down to pitching. And when you talk about pitching now, a lot of it is bullpens. And so that's kind of a question mark with the Giants. And the bigger problem is LA. I think if we stop focusing on the Dodgers and say, if we can beat San Diego, if we can compete with them, I think there's kind of a different way to look at it. But like you, I'm optimistic. You and I, ever since the first day we met, this is what we've talked about, I think, the most. We both grew up loving baseball. We both grew up in an era of Willie Mays and Willie McCovey and some of the greatest players that have ever played. And so, hopefully their offense can start to show. We'll see they have a long way to go, only 161 games to go. So I have seen some articles saying, "Oh, it's the same team. Let's hang it up now," and all of that.
Well, it gets back to your point about social media. It's like the negativity, the people who are unhappy seem always to show up.
Yeah.
And it's like one game. You go, well, see, I told you they're no good. Well, let's let the season unfold. What I'm hoping at a minimum is that they'll be more interesting.
Yeah.
The kind of lineup they have, they're not going to have guys who hit 3-run home runs very often. They got a couple of guys who can do that.
Yeah.
But the fact is, stringing 5 or 6 hits together and scoring 3 runs that way is a lot more fun to watch than a 3-run homer anyway.
Yeah.
So I'm optimistic about that. And the last couple of years they've committed to me the unpardonable sin. They're just not interesting. And they get down 3-0, and you think, well, that's it. They're not going to come back. So I'm hoping that they'll be better that way.
Yeah.
And if nothing else, I'm just glad baseball's back, because it's always more fun to watch that. It's like the soundtrack of the summer.
Yep. And one other thing is Buster Posey, who's really running the show. You can say whatever you want, but he has not stayed pat. He has been out there very aggressively trying to improve this team. And I think that's what you want. And I think he understands that you got to put an interesting product out on the field. If you're going to bring fans, put fans in the seats and get the community excited.
Well, when he was hired for the job he has, he said, we are in the memory making business.
Yeah.
And boy, that, first of all, for him to be smart enough to coin that phrase, or maybe he didn't. Either way, it's spot on.
Yeah.
I mean, what do we love about baseball? You and I can go back about things we saw and things we heard.
Yeah.
Great calls on the radio, great calls. So, yeah, I'd like to make some good memories this year.
Yeah.
And I think that's as good a place as any to wrap it up. Bob, it's always fun to be with you. I'm Mark Simon.
I'm Bob Marks.
And thanks to Frank Bravo, our producer. We'll see you again soon.